Okay, I think we'll start. And firstly, just thank you so much to everyone for picking up on the last minute changes, some technical issues boxed us, and we had to change platform, but slightly different format, and hopefully the webinar won't lose its message. So again, thanks for joining us to our panelists who are fully international, all across the world. So we've got some competing time zones here, and I think our audience is international as well. So let's kick off by talking about the increasingly difficult issue of how to communicate your business's sustainability journey. Our speakers are going to share with you their thoughts, and then we'll have a bit of time at the end for a Q&A. We can talk about maybe your company's kind of specific issues or challenges. If you want to submit questions for Q&A, there was a Q&A box on Zoom, but on Google Meet, I think just pop them in the little conversation box, which it should be on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. It just looks like a little speech bubble. So I think everyone who's tuned in today probably knows who Earthly are, but if we've got any new participants, then a big hello from Earthly. Just to introduce us quickly, we basically exist to help businesses invest in nature-based solutions, so help match up projects all around the world that use nature to improve biodiversity, to reduce and remove carbon, and to improve local livelihoods of local people. We help businesses identify which projects they would like to support, and then kind of work out how much of their impact they want to balance. But let's talk about communicating your sustainability journey, and of course why you need to get it right. So as you can see, it's become a really important part of our industry. In recent years, as soon as companies kind of took positive actions for the climate, whether that was reduction, offsetting, supply chain decisions, improving diversity, etc., they were able to kind of promote their activity through their network, through their website, even social media and advertising. And it was normally met with sort of positive feedback, raising the profile of their brand, and often associating them with kind of honourable, sustainable practices and improving sales. Consequently, this inspired other brands to do the same. So it's kind of a really momentum building process of sharing sustainability stories. However, it wasn't long before PR teams and marketing teams cottoned onto this, and this success by association meant that green claims were cropping up all over the place. The European Commission actually delved into it this year and reckoned that 42% of green claims are exaggerated, false or deceptive. The term greenwashing actually was first coveted by an environmentalist. He was staying at a hotel and noticed, or so the story goes, staying at a hotel and noticed that they weren't offering to wash the towels or wash the linen for sustainability reasons, but actually it was to cut costs. So he kind of worked out that this marketing ploy existed and was calling it greenwashing. Luckily, consumers, the public, and environmentalists aren't quite as gullible as some brands hope. So unsubstantiated claims are often getting called out more than ever. While this kind of citizen policing of green claims is a good thing, it often can be done quite an, I guess, aggressive or accusatory tone. And we've reached a situation where brands are now too nervous to talk about their sustainability policy or their sustainability action, and their marketing teams and their PR teams are kind of shying away from talking about it at all, which is a bad thing in two ways, really, because without brands sharing their actions, the rest of the industry isn't kind of motivated to make changes and keep up with their peers, but also consumers might not be making the most sustainable choices either. So for these reasons, obviously, we want companies to be able to share their sustainability journey. We know there's a way to speak about it, and we know there's a way to get it right. So it brings me to introduce our first panelist, who is Earthly's own head of marketing, Shelby Torrence. So Shelby, could you kick us off with maybe how brands could, where to start and how they should define their purpose?
Sure, I'm happy to, Jenny. Thank you. Defining your brand's purpose is really, it's very much about recognizing the emotional connection your brand makes with your audience. It's as simple as that, but it's not quite that simple. For some companies it is. This comes easier, and we see an increasing number of companies that are very purpose-led organizations that are achieving incredible success. Patagonia, Tesla, Zoom. So this is really a shift that's happened over the past few years, and it's working very well. For other companies, it's a bigger challenge. And I'll be honest, I come from the B2B space. I think in B2B companies, this is much more difficult because we're so accustomed to talking about features and functionality. We tend to think of our buyers as being very logical and not recognizing the emotional element. So this is where it gets to be quite challenging for some companies to really shift the mindset and be able to look at the emotional connection that needs to be made. This is particularly difficult for larger organizations where it's hard to make a shift like this. It's not going to happen overnight, and it takes a lot of effort. But it does happen. It is possible. There are some very traditional companies, like for instance, Lego is a traditional company that's been around for decades that has made this shift from profit-led to purpose-led, and it's been quite successful for them. I think the thing that's really important for all business people to remember is that people choose a brand because it feels close to who they are or who they want to be. And this isn't just about customers. This is also about employees. This is about partners. I think now, in general, in our society, people recognize this more. Maybe in the past, people were not as honest about needing that emotional connection, that level of trust. But now people really have embraced it for a lot of different reasons. I think COVID and being in lockdown had an impact on a lot of us that made us look at our lives. I think social media is changing this. People are embracing more comfortably who they are, and they're voting with their wallets. They're choosing the brands that reflect their values. They're choosing employers that reflect their values, and they're shouting about the things that they love and calling out those brands that they think are being inauthentic. I've seen it myself personally. So I've been a hiring manager for about 10 years. And if I look at the past couple years, candidates have really transformed. They very much come into interviews having done a lot of research on the company. They look at if what you're saying to them matches what they're seeing about you online. I had a candidate one time, she reached out to someone on my team on LinkedIn who was from the same country as her and said, hey, how is this person as a manager? How is this company? And I thought that was really great. We did hire her because she really was clear about wanting to make sure she came into the right environment. And actually, when you talk about brand purpose, this is where it starts. It very much starts with employees. You can't talk about your brand purpose with your customers. You can't talk about it externally until you really get your employees aligned. When you look at brand and when you look at sustainability, it's really important in both cases to be careful that don't think of it as the domain of a single department. Both brand and sustainability teams should actually work together because both need to educate and enable the entire organization. You need to build champions throughout the organization, throughout all of the departments. Once you've done that, then I would say the next step is to move on to your partners and suppliers. And after that, you can look at how you communicate this externally.
Thank you, Shelby. Just speaking on mute. It's really useful to consider the difference between B2B and B2C when it comes to purpose, that kind of product versus purpose situation. yeah, and also that sustainability and brand need to run through the entire company rather than being an individual or even a whole department's kind of responsibility. If you've got any questions for Shelby about brand or purpose, stick them in the conversation box. So let's next hear from Isaac Kenyon, who's a co-founder at Climate Explorers, to dig into a bit more detail about how brands should actually talk about their sustainability journeys.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Shelby. I may echo a little bit what Shelby said. She's kind of touched on what you can say and how you should go about it, you know, with the internal company approach. I think all of the communications and how you should share your sustainability journey, it first needs to start with the mission statement and purpose, which is what Shelby said with defining the brand, and how that intrinsically links with how you are, you know, a distinguisher in a market, and that all needs to be entwined in one. And then from there, you sort of build in and embed that sustainability culture and journey within your employees, and then you can go and talk about it externally. So I guess I will be talking more past the internal education amongst employees. So once employees have had a culture of understanding why they're doing what they're doing and what is important is in a sustainable sense of the products that they are trying to sell or create. Once they're completely aligned and that transparency is there, it's all about then educating everybody else who is a stakeholder with the business. So that's clients and people who may just go online and check out the company and the product. And one way you can do that is by actually sharing and being transparent amongst your policies as a company, your sustainable practices that you have within your organization. The best way to embed them really is through policy making, so that actually your employees are following what is being said and what is being talked about, and then sharing that in a transparent way, maybe having it on the website or throughout your communications when you are, you know, selling a product or working with a client, for instance. And they may even ask, can we have a look at some of your policies? And also being able to explain any certifications. There's a lot of brands out there who work through certification processes for a sustainable journey, which is really helpful in terms of the new structure of a company, where you're creating a new way of representing yourself. And B Corp certification, a lot of people probably on this webinar is aware of that, and that's a very good certification process for building in policies and changing the way you do business and how you communicate with stakeholders, and being able to educate the employees what B Corp certification is, but also what it is for the customers or the clients. Why is this important, and what does this mean? And a lot of people may stick a B Corp logo onto what they're doing, but without the education, the role of being an educator and actually sharing why this is important, why have we gone down this certification, it doesn't mean as much. And it will be very difficult for you as a company, or anyone who's running a company, to communicate their sustainable journey if that isn't outlined. And then any form of sustainable terminology for us in a sustainable sort of, I guess, sector, we may know about all of this terminology like the back of our hands. We've spoken about all of these terms, but for the customer or new clients who are new to this world of sustainability or trying to get involved, they may not know what these terms mean. And being transparent and actually being able to talk about what they are within communications, PR communications, or over the website or on the products being sold, what these terms mean, it can be vital in communicating that sustainability journey that you are going on as a company. And the other last point I'll say, guess I'm talking a lot on this question, is a symbiotic relationship with the external stakeholders, allowing them to discuss your own sustainability journey as a brand, having an opportunity to have a forum, for instance, about how the company is going, where it's going with its sustainability. They may suggest pointers that maybe hasn't been brought up internally before, and that could improve the sustainability journey that you're having, and also help provide advice and guidance, as well as point out some flaws that you could work on. And having that sort of open, transparent dialogue with the customers and the clients, you can co-create a sustainability journey that just never ends, because as we know, a lot of people in the world of sustainability, there's always room for improvement, and having more heads and people supporting that is vital. So having that sort of open dialogue with your customers and clients is really, really a good way to embrace the journey.
Thank you so much, Isaac. Yeah, it's really interesting. It shows that, again, to echo Shelby's point, everyone needs to be involved at all levels, and everyone will bring a slightly different perspective onto how to communicate these sort of things, but also how it's going to be received at different levels and different areas of the business, etc. My next question is for Carissa Cabrera, who is the founder of the Conservationist Collective, and is dialing in all the way from Hawaii, so we really appreciate it. Carissa, can you talk to us a bit about how to use social channels specifically in an authentic way?
Yeah, thank you, Jenny, and thanks everyone for tuning in for this. Something that is so intimidating but also exciting about social channels is that, echoing Isaac and Shelby's sentiments, is there's an opportunity to build a relationship with your consumer base or potential consumer base, and build really a community online. And nowadays that really shines through storytelling and showing up authentically with your differentiator. So for an example, if you have something that might highlight your sustainability efforts and initiatives, but also you may have like room to improve. Maybe you want to pursue the B Corp certification. There's actually an amazing opportunity to tell that story directly and honestly, that will build trust with your community online. So I wouldn't shy away from those types of opportunities to say, hey, I'm imperfect, but we're making steps of progress. Because like Isaac said, there's always going to be a next step of improvement for the private sector. And so authenticity is a huge advantage and value add to a modern day social media strategy. And when you're thinking about what that might look like on the day-to-day when it comes to like your content, I always lean on, we talk about content pillars, right? But like, what's your ultimate message and your ultimate purpose for why you're making these environmental or sustainability steps, or what you're trying to give to the world to improve it a little bit, and hone in on that, because that can end up being your differentiator in all of your content. So for example, mine is ocean conservation is climate action. So when I'm creating content, I try to tie it back to that overall message, because then you end up building a community and reaching an audience that agrees or wants to learn more. And that humanization is a huge advantage. So don't shy away from, I guess, imperfection or trying different things and things that maybe we would have a few years ago not wanted to post online as our official social media strategy. And then another point is that because the social media landscape is evolving so rapidly, and because younger audiences want different things than maybe 5 to 10 years ago, it's extremely important to allow your creative team or even leadership provide freedom to what content might look like, and have the courage to test new things and see what might land. Because at the end of the day, growing your channels isn't as important as growing it with the right people. And so every small step every message and piece of content that you take is a small step forward to building a community of aligned folks that want to learn more. And you can only really figure out what that is by testing other things. So when you think about your authenticity and how you're showing up in the digital space, don't be afraid to be different and to try different things and to maybe be like, that didn't work, but now we learned from it. And also tell your story of what's going on behind the scenes, whether it's putting your team on screen or sharing your entire process from start to finish of how you achieved a certification. That will really connect the relationship, I think, in a way that is sustainable long term.
Thanks so much, Carissa. Yeah, I've been thinking about the kind of irony behind sharing an imperfect sustainability journey is actually almost safer than claiming you've got it right and it's perfect and it's done. So not to shy away from sharing something that has room for improvement and development. So the next of our panelists, our final panelist that you're going to hear from is Angela Zhong, who is also joining us from the US. And Angela, please, could you chat to us a bit about how to avoid greenwashing on socials and also in advertising for brands?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and for having me here. I think the youth perspective, especially on social media, is really important. And I think for companies who are curious as to how to avoid greenwashing on social and in advertising, I think you're already on the right track. The work is definitely very difficult in that there are sometimes not really defined lines between what counts as greenwashing versus what doesn't. And so I think one of the biggest things is to just be honest and intentional about what you're trying to communicate. So for example, when you mentioned the anecdote on hotels, that really resonated with me because I had felt the same thing before. And I think in that situation, it's very clear that they have incentives that are not related to having a more environmental impact, right? It's more about the bottom line. And so whenever you are posting and you are sharing initiatives that you're doing to try to be more eco-friendly, I think one of the questions to ask is that the main purpose of this program, right? Is it really to get a tax benefit, et cetera? Because if it is, people can also put those dots together. It's not that difficult. And so I feel a couple of other mechanisms that could be good. I know Isaac touched on looking at third-party certifiers, and I definitely agree. I think the landscape there is a little bit confusing in terms of people don't know what organic versus no GMOs, et cetera, means, and that extends to the deforestation pledges and things like that as well. And so companies that are interested in investing in that education, I think, are not losing anything because these people were going to invest in greenwashing themselves anyways, right? So it's now the finances and funding is being redirected towards more effective causes. The second is in terms of when you do have promises and they aren't audited, I think ensuring that the follow through is to the best of your capacity, right? So the example that I think of for this is afforestation pledges. A lot of companies promise oh, by 2030 we're going to plant X amount of trees, right? And it's always some ridiculously large amount. But if you follow up with what these companies have actually done, ask yourself, are these companies planting them in a sustainable way, right? Is the labor they're using sustainable? Are the plants they're using biodiverse, but also local to the region? How are they following up? Because what I've seen happen more and more is these pledges are being announced and these seeds are being planted, but the trees will just die off, for example, because there isn't any willpower to sustain it beyond that initial planting, right? It's not really just about planting the seed. It's about cultivating an environment where these ecosystems can succeed and thrive. And I think that that's what makes for it to be not greenwashing when there's a clear intention to follow through and commit to what you've promised, because we have heard so many of these promises before. I don't think that oh, if a company is announcing another one, it's suddenly groundbreaking, right? So in the case in which companies are already beginning to try to do these types of initiatives, that's what makes you stand out. And then I think the last thing is oftentimes when you look at a brand and they have like an eco line, so like H&M, for example, I think what these companies often do is they will compare whatever their practice is to like the average industry practice. And so they can be like, oh, these jeans like use 30% less water or something like that, which is like great and everything, right? But like, I think the status quo industry practices are just like so behind like the types of consumption practices that we actually do need, that comparing yourself to the bare minimum is not really sufficient, right? And so whenever you're telling customers like, oh, we're not like the worst off, like that's great, but I think that we should actually just be flipping that narrative and comparing companies to the most sustainable versions of those products and seeing like what those differentiating factors are. And I think that that conversation and knowledge sharing should be very transparent. And also like gaps in knowledge sharing should also be very transparent. Like I think social media especially is a great tool to tap into the customer base and ask them like, what would you like to see? Like, what are some concerns you have? Like, how can we answer these questions? Or like get back to you on how we're going to make these improvements. And I think that type of individualized engagement is what really makes people stand out on social media. And I think that like using any of these mechanisms can really help a company to take the next step forward.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think my takeaway from that is that the kind of follow-ups on companies' pledges are actually more interesting than the actual pledges themselves. It's when companies are promoting the progress they've made or the contributions they've made in respect to previous pledges. So that's where the real kind of storytelling is. To summarize, really, I think a key kind of theme through everything that everyone said is about educating your employees, so at all levels, and stakeholders around the business as well. This means kind of involving them in your sustainability plans, but also helping people get up to scratch on terminology or industry developments, that kind of thing. To be honest and authentic, don't make empty statements. You know, if you can't see how you're going to publish the follow-up to claims and pledges and promises, then it's not worth using them on social and advertising. And to I don't know, be open and be forthcoming with sort of incomplete or room for improvement or less than perfect sustainability actions and journeys, and emphasizing that they are maybe the first steps, or just you're testing the water, or you're kind of on a path to an ultimate goal. Working with respected partners is really important. So that could be kind of third-party certifications, or looking at supply chain and everyone kind of connected to your business to check that they have a similar mission to you, and that you're not going to be kind of greenwashing by association. Be open to critique is really important. So connecting with your audience, but also others in the industry, and seeing how you know, other opinions can help guide the way that you share your sustainability journey. So I think we should go to Q&A now. We haven't had as many questions through just because I think there's a much smaller crowd thanks to our technical problems, but I've had a few questions sent in ahead of time that I would love to speak about. First off, I know, Shelby, you mentioned some examples when you spoke to us about brand, but maybe to our other panelists, are there any companies or brands that you think are really good at sharing their sustainability journey?
Yeah, I can start. I quite like Elvis and Cress, and maybe people have heard of that brand, based here in the UK. And one of the things that they did quite early on was quite a significant statement of 50% profits going towards their charity, firefighters charity, and Barefoot College. But what I do like about their sustainability journey is they explicitly tell you where the money is being spent, the other profits. and where specifically it's being spent and how it's being spent and what impact it's having in terms of climate. So one of which is fighting climate change. They spend an X amount of money with a regenerative agriculture project where they moved their offices to, which I found very, very interesting. And they've actually began a sort of whole entire hub education network where the money's been invested into this regenerative agriculture project, but also into learning about renewable energies, sustainable construction, rainwater harvesting, things like that, where people can then come in, customers even, clients, and learn how to do it themselves, and they're educating from there. So in terms of sustainability journey, they've taken, you know, the objective, this is the aim, what Angela was saying, they followed through with it, and then they're now showing people how to do it also. So I think a sustainable journey is quite powerful when you can share how you did it so that others can replicate it and then share those milestones as you're going. And I think they do that very well, Elvis and Cress, and I've been following them for years. Similar to Patagonia, of course, most people would probably say that's a good share of their sustainable journey. I wasn't going to take that one because it's probably one of the obvious ones, but I'll leave that for someone else.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. It's all about transparency, and I think in the past maybe people would have thought, oh, no one cares about these things, but as Shelby mentioned, people's attitudes are really changing and they're kind of interested in the nitty-gritty, I guess. Are there any other brands that that you guys could think of, or individuals?
Yeah, I would like to add just something because Isaac covered really great model, but there's also a role to play in a redistribution of profits that Isaac highlighted. So there's a very, very small brand here based out of California. They're actually a kombucha brand, but they also provide micro grants to students or early career environmentalists to help kind of a balance and equity piece to it, but also provide opportunities and pathways towards meaningful careers. So whether they're donating through, for example, they sponsored an intern through our organization. And so those types of investments in, you know, whether it's a workforce, whether it's people, whether it's consumer base, is also, I think, helpful not only to like in addition to certifications or internal policies and outward messaging as well, and education, like Isaac highlighted.
Yeah, I think it shows that there's so much more than just offsetting carbon or planting trees. There's people to think about, and especially for earthly biodiversity is a huge thing, and yeah, that can kind of extend in many different directions. We've had a couple of questions actually about words, phrases, terms to avoid that might kind of put you into a greenwashing trap. So I don't know who would like to talk about anything to avoid.
I think you may have highlighted it earlier, Jenny, but just to avoid the sentiment that like the work is done, I guess, or avoid that, you know, you've taken these measures and that's all you'll take, because there's always room for improvement, and there's so many more tools available and resources available for the private sector to take additional steps. And I just would really advise being forthcoming about the entire process, especially if it isn't perfect.
Yeah, totally agree. How do we maintain an appreciation of nature in an increasingly digital world? So I guess the question is surrounding the fact that, you know, social advertising, this sort of stuff can feel a bit detached from nature or biodiversity or whatever it is that you're kind of supporting through your company. How do we bring those together?
I think highlighting that within your communications where you're sharing about sustainable innovations or the projects that you're getting involved in, encouraging people to get outside as well and actually enjoy nature. Some people are so hooked onto their laptops. I mean, throughout the pandemic as well, we were all stuck indoors in lockdowns and things like that. And in some places there are still lockdowns going on, but that detachment could be, I guess, reversed a bit if we communicated getting outside as an objective as well, so that people can see why it's important we should plant trees, not just for our sort of carbon effect. I think sometimes what gets a little bit misled is that we need to reduce the number of degrees by more trees, but trees are not just for the number of degrees and reducing the temperature and carbon sink effect. They are also for biodiversity. For us, we are part of biodiversity. We take in the trees. It calms us. It calms our, who we are as humans. We're mammals. We're meant to play outside and things like this. And I think sometimes being able to go outside in nature and actually appreciate these outdoor spaces where you can, and communicate that as a company to get people outside, they will understand a little bit more why you want to protect these spaces and why you're supporting sustainable journeys through carbon offsetting, perhaps to grow new forests that are biodiverse, so that, one, we can recreationally enjoy it, but two, it also helps the planet and the animals and things like that too, and acts as a carbon sink. But I think for it just to be seen as a carbon sink sometimes can be quite misleading, and it doesn't encourage people to get outside and reconnect with nature. So that's another way we could communicate it as what we're doing with our carbon offsets and things like that.
Thanks, Isaac. Another question that we've also touched on a little bit, but how is the best way to educate your social media team or your social person, getting them up to speed on the correct sustainability or industry terminology? So, I mean, there's lots we can do, but does anyone have any immediate suggestions?
Yeah, I can touch on this. So I guess it depends on what level of resources you have. So you can bring in the science team or those that understand this to the greatest extent to brief the social media team through presentations or sessions and allow opportunities for discussion and to ask questions. But it would also, be really helpful, especially at the beginning, to have your science team participate in some form of copywriting as well. Science communication is a really emerging space, and not everyone has the resources to have a science communicator on their team. So kind of bridging that gap between those that might understand the technical pieces of this and those that are delivering that message, creating opportunities for them to have open communication and talk more in depth about it would be, I guess, my recommendation.
Thanks, Carissa. Shelby, did you have something that you wanted to add to that as well?
Yeah, I would add it's really important to have someone who has a natural passion for this, because it changes so rapidly and there is so much information. So I think looking at your marketing, your social media team, and understanding who really has a passion and wants to be more involved, that's a good place to start if you can, because it's always going to change. And I think to Carissa's point, like, it's really important to make sure that you have the scientific and the technical knowledge, but it's not like you're going to learn everything in a week. You're going to have to continuously absorb information and understand the space and see how it evolves. So you want to have someone who naturally cares about this very passionately.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Isaac, this might be a question for you, because you touched on mission statements when you spoke earlier. Obviously, that's an easy thing to do if you're setting up a business, but can you kind of retrofit a mission statement into a company or a brand if you maybe didn't have a focus on that in the first place?
Yeah, I've come across some companies that have been able to maintain the mission statement, but the actions they do below the mission statement have changed. So the mission statement maybe perhaps was, we want to, I don't know, make the world a better place. That could be anything, like selling loaves to poor communities so that they can get things quite cheaply and have access to, I don't know, a new phone that they didn't have. But you can change your KPIs, your lower objectives that tie into the mission statement, so that those objectives and KPIs have a sustainable term. So it's you can almost maintain the mission statement as it was before, but usually there's a lot of objectives that feed into a mission statement that a company runs, and then below that there's a load of KPIs and targets and things like that. So those objectives can change, and you can, in your sustainable journey, you can say, we've changed our objectives here, and the mission statement's still the same. We want to deliver this, but we want to do it in this way. So it's almost changing the way you're delivering your mission, but not necessarily changing the mission statement itself. I've seen companies do that before.
I would also add to that, there's nothing wrong with changing your mission statement. So even if you have one, it's a really great exercise to go through with your organization. Is this still valid? Does this still represent who we are? So if your mission statement isn't really still valid, then throw it out and take the opportunity to work with your team on the correct mission statement that really represents who you are. You're on mute, Jenny.
Thank you, Shelby. Just wanted to also take the opportunity to invite anyone else from the audience if they wanted to ask any questions about any specific challenges they've faced. If not, or in the meantime, I'll just address a question that we have from Liam about an Earthly specific the marketing kind of support that we offer to new Earthly clients. And I promise this wasn't planted. it's not a promo, but Liam, we support any Earthly customers with their kind of marketing and communications from whenever they've signed up, and this kind of includes, we call it an advocacy deck, but it's a big pack on loads of the things that we've talked about today, about how to explain how you're working with Earthly and how you're working with the specific projects that we've connected you with. So what kind of to say about them, and to say about your level of support. Depending on your level of support, there could be things like the badge, but we can also help you with specific copy, or if you want kind of branded materials, that sort of stuff for social, for visuals, we have that. So yeah, if you are a climate positive business, then that's our certification, and there's a badge to go with that, which you can use in your branding. But then the other levels of support through Earthly don't have the badge, because it's not such a sort of thorough commitment, but we support with marketing communications in all of our products. Okay, well, we can move past the Q&A to something that I just wanted to mention before we sign off, which is the Gift Nature kind of campaign that we're running this Christmas, this holiday season, and it's just to sort of combat the world of corporate gifting. I think we had a bit of a focus on Black Friday, and this year's Black Friday there was less kind of consumption and waste than last year's. So we're riding this downwards trend of the people's more maybe considerate gifting, and Earthly are actually running a project where you can buy a digital gift card on someone's behalf, and you can choose whether that gift card supports mangrove restoration in Madagascar, or woodland protection and restoration in the UK, or kind of a bundle, which is a few projects that we work with. You can choose how much you want to support on someone's behalf, and then you'll get sent this little gift card to say that that's what they've received for Christmas instead of, I don't know, fancy wine or chocolates or whatever it is that your company sends out. So that's if that's of interest, then you can head to our website, and it's just /gift-nature. There's an order form on there. But yeah, that's everything from us, and I want to thank everyone for joining despite the complications, and thank you so much to our panelists who have offered some really, really good insight and action points. If anyone does think of questions, then just send them over, let us know. I'll definitely share the recording out with everyone, because I think we've got a significant number of attendees who weren't able to join. But yeah, thank you everyone, and we'll leave it there.